Welcome back, Nightmare Hunters. And if you're new here, a huge welcome to the HOA Nightmare Files, your ultimate destination for jaw-dropping true stories of HOA overreach and the epic battles against it. Before we dive into today's unbelievable tale, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you're always the first to find out when our latest HOA nightmare hits the screen. All right, let's get into this video.
You know, I've heard a lot of HOA stories in my time. The meticulously measured lawns, the unapproved paint colors, the sheer, unadulterated tyranny of self-appointed suburban monarchs. But never, not in a million years, did I ever imagine a case where an HOA president tried to steal a man's property only to find out he owned the very ground their clubhouse stood on. This isn't a story of a simple dispute. This is a tale of a man who just wanted to fish, and an HOA president who found out the hard way that you don't mess with a man's legacy. It all started with a quiet lake and a woman whose smile was plastered on, a cheap veneer over a house of cards. Our story is about John, a man over 65 with a face weathered like old timber and a gentle spirit. His hands, gnarled from years of honest work and holding a fishing rod, tell a story of quiet contentment. He's lived in his lakeside cabin his entire life, a cabin that's been in his family for generations. The scent of pine and lake water clings to the very wood of the walls. His family's history is woven into the very fabric of the landscape, from the old oak tree by the dock where his grandfather taught him to tie knots, to the worn path leading to the spring house his great-grandmother used. He rises with the sun, casts his line into the tranquil waters of Pine Lake, and spends his days in blissful solitude, interrupted only by the occasional visit from a curious deer or the cheerful persistence of a tiny feathered alarm clock, the robin that nests near his window. He's not a part of the Pine Lakes development or its HOA. His property, a sprawling, untouched haven, predates it by decades, a fact he'd always taken for granted. He lives a simple life, a quiet life, a life of fishing and peace. The cabin isn't a mansion, but it's a sanctuary, filled with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. But the new HOA president, a woman we'll call Karen, has a personality like an unskippable ad, pervasive and increasingly irritating. She was probably in her late 50s with a helmet of suspiciously immovable blonde hair, a penchant for leopard print ensembles that screamed discount safari, and a perpetually pursed expression as if constantly smelling something unpleasant. She believed her ascension to HOA president was akin to a coronation. She drove a gleaming white Lexus SUV, the kind that screamed, "I need to speak to the manager." She saw John's untouched, rustic cabin as an eyesore, a blight on her perfectly manicured suburban kingdom. It didn't fit her vision of pristine homogeneity. Her first act was a series of courtesy notices, laminated of course, and delivered by a flustered teenager on a golf cart. These notices, citing aesthetic nonconformity and unapproved natural growth, demanded John trim his ancient oak, remove his unsightly fishing boat from the dock, and even repaint his cabin a more community-friendly shade of beige. John, being a reasonable man who believed in live and let live, politely ignored them. As he was not a member of their HOA, nor was his property within their jurisdiction, he simply tossed the notices onto his woodpile, a silent act of defiance. But Karen was not reasonable. She was a woman who treated her position with the zealous intensity of someone trying to right a cosmic wrong. Her harassment escalated with alarming speed. She filed cease and desist orders for his unauthorized dock, tried to get a lien on John's property for imaginary, unpaid dues and maintenance fees, and even attempted to get a county building inspector to condemn John's cabin for spurious fire code violations and structural instability. Each time, John, with a deep sigh, would simply forward the documents to his old friend, Sheriff Clay Winslow, who usually just shake his head and tell John to keep fishing. One morning, John found a small, cheap plastic fence erected across his private access road to the lake, emblazoned with a Pine Lakes HOA private property sign. Karen, in her lime green pantsuit that did her no favors, was standing nearby directing a couple of bored-looking landscapers. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," she chirped, her voice dripping with forced congeniality. "Just ensuring proper community access. Your little path here was causing some confusion." John walked up to the fence, pulled the flimsy stakes from the ground, and tossed the sign into the nearby bushes. "This is my land, Karen. It always has been. And this path is my private access. You are trespassing." Karen's smile didn't falter, but her eyes, little chips of blue ice, hardened. "We'll see about that, Mr. Henderson. Community spirit is very important around here." She even used her own pet rock as a paperweight for her fake documents, a bizarre detail that would later be recounted in court. Her eyebrows were perfectly sculpted like tiny, angry caterpillars planning world domination. The harassment became a daily affair. Karen would walk her manicured dog on the public path that bordered John's property, shouting suggestions about his unapproved shed or the length of his grass. She'd sent her Community Standards Adherence Committee, a group of perpetually flustered retirees with clipboards, to photograph John's violations. One afternoon, John watched as a drone, emblazoned with the HOA logo, buzzed directly over his porch, its camera clearly pointed at his porch. He waved at it, a slow, deliberate motion, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He knew what they were doing. John, initially amused, then grew weary. The constant barrage of threats, the petty intrusions, the sheer audacity of it all began to chip away at his peace. He found himself spending more time checking his mailbox than casting his line. He hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Sarah. Sarah, with her perfectly sculpted eyebrows like tiny angry caterpillars planning world domination, saw through Karen's flimsy legal threats immediately. Her initial reaction was a slow, deliberate blink, followed by a dry, "Oh, this is going to be fun."
The legal battle became a marathon, not a sprint. Karen, a woman who treated her designer bag like a hostage, valuable but a definite burden, was relentless. She filed cease and desist orders, tried to get a lien on John's property for imaginary unpaid dues and maintenance fees, and even attempted to get a county building inspector to condemn John's cabin for spurious fire code violations and structural instability. Each time, Sarah, calm and methodical, batted away Karen's attempts with surgical precision. She filed motions to dismiss, citing lack of jurisdiction, presented John's long-standing tax records, and even brought in an independent surveyor to reaffirm John's property lines, which consistently showed Karen's community signs firmly on John's land. Karen, undeterred, escalated. She claimed John's property was an attractive nuisance due to its proximity to the lake, demanding he install a fence around his entire 3,000 acres for community safety. She sent a letter threatening to tow his fishing boat, claiming it was obstructing community views. She even tried to get the local utility company to disconnect his power, arguing his cabin was unregistered with the HOA. John, with a deep sigh, found himself spending more time in Sarah's office than on his porch. He started to feel the weight of this absurd, manufactured war. His patience, a finite resource, was rapidly depleting with each minor annoyance. Sarah, meanwhile, was building her own case. She noticed inconsistencies in Karen's paperwork, particularly regarding the Pine Lakes development's initial land acquisition. Karen's documents often referenced vague community easements and historical agreements that Sarah couldn't find in any public record. Sarah, with the meticulousness of a librarian, began to dig deeper. Her curiosity piqued. She pulled old county records, dusty plat maps, and obscure historical society archives. The deeper she went, the more questions arose. There were gaps, missing links, and strange anomalies in the chain of title for the Pine Lakes development. It was like a poorly written instruction manual, confusing, contradictory, and missing key steps. The conflict came to a head in a local court. The courtroom was packed. buzzing with curious Pine Lakes residents, many of whom had heard the wild rumors about John and Karen's feud. Karen, representing the HOA, stood before the judge with a stack of forged documents, her smile plastered on, a cheap veneer over a house of cards. She spoke with the confident swagger of someone who hadn't fully grasped the difficulty of the situation. She claimed John was a squatter on land owned by the Pine Lakes development, presenting a revised map that showed John's cabin squarely within HOA boundaries. Her arguments were a symphony of passive aggression, and the whole affair was a symphony of her own self-importance. She had even managed to get some of the other HOA board members to testify, though their testimonies were full of he said, she said, and lacked any real substance. They were clearly intimidated by Karen, echoing her claims about John being an unreasonable recluse holding up vital community progress. John, sitting quietly with Sarah, listened patiently. He wore confidence like a slightly ill-fitting toupee, noticeable, but doing its job. The judge, a man who had seen everything, seemed to be losing his patience with Karen's theatrical performance. He repeatedly asked for verifiable county-stamped documentation, which Karen consistently failed to produce, instead offering more of her crudely typed HOA-certified papers. When it was his turn, Sarah rose. She didn't grandstand, she didn't raise her voice, she simply presented a beautifully bound portfolio of documents, each tabbed and cross-referenced. She began by presenting John's original land deed, signed and dated over a century ago, a genuine historical artifact that smelled faintly of old paper and forgotten dreams. The judge's eyes widened as he reviewed the pages, his gaze lingering on the ornate script and the official county seals. Sarah continued, methodically laying out a history of the land, using survey maps, meticulously kept tax records, and obscure historical documents that predated the Pine Lakes development by nearly a century. She explained that the Pine Lakes development had been built on land that had been a part of John's family estate for generations. The developers, in their haste, had either ignored or simply missed the complex legal history of the land, assuming it was public property or part of their initial acquisition.
The big reveal was not a quick soundbite. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of Karen's entire world, brick by fraudulent brick. Sarah presented the judge with the full story. John didn't just own the cabin and the land it sat on. He owned 3,000 acres, a sprawling tract of land that included the entire lake, most of the surrounding forest, and, crucially, all of the land that the Pine Lakes development and its clubhouse were built on. Sarah presented a series of interlocking deeds, each one authenticated by forensic document examiners. She showed how a small, almost imperceptible error in a 1950s county land survey had led to a misinterpretation of boundaries, which subsequent developers had either overlooked or deliberately exploited. She presented evidence of a trust established by John's great-grandfather that held the vast majority of the land, a trust that had been quietly and meticulously maintained for generations, its existence known only to a select few family members and their trusted legal counsel. The legal history was so long and so complex that the HOA's developers had simply missed it, assuming the land was public or their own. A hush fell over the courtroom. Karen's jaw literally fell open. Her face, under the heavy makeup, went from a smug pink to a mottled white. The other HOA board members, who had earlier testified with such misplaced confidence, now looked like startled deer caught in headlights. Their little power structure, their cozy arrangement, had just been publicly and spectacularly detonated. The judge called for a brief recess to examine the extensive, undeniable documentation presented by Sarah. He looked at John, a flicker of something akin to awe in his eyes. When court resumed, the judge, a man of few words, spoke with a voice that resonated with authority and a hint of weary satisfaction. He declared John the rightful owner of all the land in question. He ruled that the Pine Lakes HOA was an illegal entity operating on John's private property, and that all of its contracts, including the one with Karen, were null and void. He ordered the immediate dissolution of the HOA, the return of all seized funds to the residents, and a legal injunction against Karen to prevent her from any further contact with John. The clubhouse, the very symbol of Karen's petty tyranny, was now John's property. Karen was left with nothing but her own audacity, her perfectly coiffed silver hair looking slightly askew for the first time since John had known her. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. News of the ruling spread like wildfire through Pine Lakes. Residents, initially bewildered, then angry, realized they had been paying dues to an illegitimate organization, and their community was built on stolen land. Karen's phone exploded with calls from furious homeowners demanding answers. The local news, tipped off by a disgruntled resident, or perhaps Sarah's discreet PR team, descended on Pine Lakes, turning Karen's humiliation into a public spectacle. She tried to bluster, to deflect, but her words failed her. Her lawyer, a man who seemed to radiate discomfort, quickly hustled her out of the courtroom amidst a chorus of boos and calls for accountability. The final scene of this suburban drama took place at the lakeside. John was sitting on his porch, a fishing rod in his hand. He looked out at the now quiet lake, the ripples from a jumping fish the only disturbance. The former HOA clubhouse, now a simple community hall under his new management, was visible in the distance. He had won, but more importantly, he had peace. His encounters with the wildlife usually involved startled shrieks and rapid retreats, but now it was just him, the water, and the quiet contentment of a man who got his land back. He had decided to let the community continue to live on the land, but under new, respectful terms. He had turned the former clubhouse into a genuine community center, a place for people to gather without the threat of a tyrant. He even hired a local beloved retired teacher, Mrs. Albright, to manage it, ensuring it would be a genuine community center, not petty rules.
The story of the man who owned the HOA became a local legend, a quiet testament to the fact that you can't push around a man whose roots run deeper than your foundations. John finally got to go back to his simple life, but now with a quiet smile, knowing he had defended not just his home, but the peace of an entire community. He still fished every morning, but now the lake felt even more his own, a vast, tranquil expanse of water and legacy. I hope you enjoyed this HOA Nightmare Files story. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below to let us all know what you think and if you have an HOA nightmare you would like to share. Until next time, have a fantastic day, and remember, don't let any Karen win.